Welcome to Nature Connects, the Nature Conservancy in Massachusetts webinar series that connects you with scientists and nature experts from New England and around the world. I'm your host, Lauren Dowd. Today, we're going to hear from two of our experts in the Massachusetts chapter about the most important conservation program you may not have heard of, the Land and Water Conservation Fund, also known as LWCF. TNC has been working on influencing the program for years, both on the federal side to drive funding to the larger initiative, and at the local level to ensure funding supports our lands here in the state. Before we dive into the TNC approach, we have a special introduction from Congressman James McGovern, who represents Massachusetts' 2nd District in the U.S. House of Representatives. Since being elected in 1996, he has been a champion for the environment, families, access to healthy food, and global human rights. In 1998, he championed an amendment that ensured LWCF was funded that year, and he has been fighting for the program ever since. Over 20 years later, he is one of the leaders working with TNC and our partners to fully and permanently fund LWCF. Thank you for joining us today, Congressman McGovern. Feel free to take it away for your introduction.
Hey, let me just make it in here. Hold on.
All right, it's not mine.
Yeah, so I guess I can't seem to connect visually here, but can you hear me okay?
Yes.
Okay, well, first of all, I want to thank everybody at the Nature Conservancy, Massachusetts, for all of your incredible and hard work, not just in putting this webinar together, but also in your efforts every day to protect the planet and inspire people across the state to get involved. I think it's a great thing to educate people about what the Land and Water Conservation Fund is and why it is so important. And as you're going to hear, it's timely to have this conversation now because we are very close to a finish line that has taken years and years to reach. It is no exaggeration to say that LWCF is one of the best ideas that Congress has taken up in the past 60 years. It enables us to maintain ecosystems, to protect endangered species, to safeguard clean air and water, and to protect access to the outdoors for communities that typically haven't had those opportunities. It even helps us prepare for and adjust to the challenges of the climate crisis. And all of this comes at no cost to taxpayers. It's no wonder that LWCF has continually garnered authentic and enthusiastic support from all over the political spectrum. You know, I've been so invested in fighting for the program over the years that I sometimes forget that I actually hadn't heard of it when I first got to Congress. During my first term in Congress, I got elected in '96, but it was in 1998. Then Speaker Newt Gingrich tried to zero it out of the budget. Some of my constituents and some of the advocacy groups brought to my attention that the program was in jeopardy. And in the process, they explained to me what LWCF was and how it was central to all sorts of conservation and recreation opportunities all across Massachusetts. So I introduced an amendment to the spending bill to restore its funding in the budget. And it succeeded with strong bipartisan support. Ever since, we've been defending it against similar attacks. And we are hopeful that we have the opportunity. I think we now get visual. And ever since, we've been defending it against similar attacks. And we're hopeful that we have an opportunity now to secure full, permanent, and dedicated funding for the program. In the years since then, I've been amazed at just how critical LWCF continues to be for our state and for our country as a whole. Whether we're talking about the Conte National Wildlife Refuge or playgrounds or open space in my hometown of Worcester, there is no shortage of ways that LWCF has positively impacted people's lives. This is especially true during these challenging times. LWCF makes it possible for people to get outside in a safe way during this pandemic. And we take a broader view, and as we take a broader view of the economic recovery that we need to shape in the months ahead, and by the way, it should be a green recovery based on the principles of sustainability and equity, we know that LWCF is one of the best tools we have in our toolbox. So you're going to hear from the panelists about how conservation is an essential piece of getting people back to work and building a more resilient future. And I hope that all of you who have tuned in are eager to learn about this important program. And by the time we're finished, I hope that you're inspired to get involved. Again, let me just end with a point that I made earlier. this program is in existence and has been protected because of organizations like the Nature Conservancy and others. I mean, good things just don't happen, and good things just don't stay in place. It happens, good things get protected because of like-minded people that come together and fight for it. That's what happened back in 1998. And that's what's happening as we move toward permanent funding. So we need you. We need people to raise their voices. We're living in a time of uncertainty. We're living in a time where there are a million things to occupy our attention. So if we are not making noise, if we are not advocating, then good programs like LWCF could be in jeopardy. So I thank you for all that you do, and I wish you the best. And please stay safe, and we will be in touch.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Congressman. We're really grateful that you were able to be with us during such a busy time. We really appreciate hearing your perspective on this important piece of legislation. So now we're going to turn it over to our speakers today. We'll be hearing from Emily Myron, Government Relations Specialist for TNC in Massachusetts. She worked with state and federal elected officials like Representative McGovern, government staff, and diverse stakeholders to develop, secure, and advance conservation policy and public funding. Emily received a Master of Environmental Management from Duke University's Nicholas School of the Environment and holds a BA in Biology from St. Mary's College of Maryland. She has worked in conservation and the policy that drives it in her home state of Maryland, in Massachusetts, and internationally. We'll hear from Markelle Smith, Landscape Partnership Manager for TNC in Massachusetts. Markelle manages land conservation projects, leveraging funds and facilitating partnerships with our land trust and state and federal agency colleagues to ensure that the most resilient lands in the state are protected. She also chairs the organization Friends of the Conte National Fish and Wildlife Refuge. Markelle received her Bachelor of Science in Terrestrial Ecology from the University of Vermont and holds a Master of Forestry from Yale University's School of Forestry and Environmental Studies. Before I hand it over to Emily and Markelle, a few quick webinar notes. The presentation will run for about 20 minutes, and then we'll take your questions. As you think of questions for Emily and Markelle, please share them in the Q&A box at the bottom of your screen. We'll try to get to as many as possible. If you have any technical problems during the presentation, please let us know in the chat box and our team will reach out to help you. For the best view of the presentation, we recommend you go to the pull-down menu at the top center of your screen and choose Fit to Window. Now, let's get started. Take it away, Emily.
Thank you, Lauren. Can you hear me okay?
Yes.
Okay, great. And I just want to say thank you as well to Representative McGovern. We're so glad that we could have him here today and so grateful for your leadership over the past 20 years and right now while we're, it's such an exciting time. So sometimes when we talk about policy, it can feel far away or like it doesn't touch down in our own lives. But everyone on this call has probably visited a site that's been conserved through the Land and Water Conservation Fund, and you might not have even known it. If you've been to the Green Mountains of Vermont, the rocky shores of Acadia National Park, the floodplains of the Connecticut River, your local park or playground, or even our capital here in Massachusetts at Boston Common, you've benefited from America's best conservation program. And so I'm excited to be able to speak with you all today about the Land and Water Conservation Fund and the current effort by the Nature Conservancy and many others to ensure that LWCF can carry out its mission. This work is a decade in the making, and as you heard from Representative McGovern, we're almost at the finish line. So a little history to start. Inspired by the outdoor movement in the 1950s and a growing consciousness of the toll that development, resource extraction, and other uses were having on the outdoors, President John F. Kennedy proposed the Land and Water Conservation Fund to safeguard natural areas, water resources, and our cultural heritage, and to provide recreation opportunities for all Americans. And in 1964, Congress passed the Land and Water Conservation Fund with large bipartisan support, and it was signed into law by President Johnson. This program has a simple yet smart design. We use revenues from the depletion of one natural resource, offshore oil and gas, to support the conservation of another resource, our precious lands and waters. So every year, $900 million in royalties paid by energy companies drilling for oil and gas on the outer continental shelf are put into this fund. And what's followed is 55 years of conservation in every state and almost every county in the US. And LWCF funds a wide range of projects. Some of the money goes to fund federal conservation in the form of our national parks, wildlife refuges, forests, and battlefields. Some goes to protect privately owned working forests, and some provide matching grants for state and local parks and recreation projects, like this one in Worcester. And again, this program comes at no cost to the American taxpayer. So you may be asking yourself, why does PNC care? Why is this something that we've invested over a decade of effort into? LWCF is one of our most important tools to save special places. This program is helping us to protect irrecoverable landscapes, views, important ecological areas, the last strongholds for certain species, and places with historic and cultural significance. And just as importantly, LWCF supports close to home outdoor opportunities, which we've seen as especially important right now in the midst of the pandemic. And these conserved areas provide numerous benefits to communities. They ensure permanent access to recreation, they improve public and mental health, and they support jobs and local economies. So in fact, here in Massachusetts, outdoor recreation is an even larger sector than education or pharmaceuticals. And these protected areas also help us as the climate changes. By keeping natural areas undeveloped, we create buffers for our communities from storms. Urban trees mitigate heat island effect in cities, and forests ensure that we have clean air and water while also storing carbon. And we also are creating places that allow species to migrate as they have to adapt to a changing climate. So over the life of the program, $240 million have come to Massachusetts, leading to the conservation of some of our most iconic and beloved places. We have LWCF to thank for the acquisition of Barrett's Farm at Minuteman National Park, which was threatened with development. It's been used to protect forests from the Quabbin Reservoir to Mount Wachusett that filter water for 2.5 million people while also providing habitat and supporting rural economies. It's led to the protection of the final inholding at Cape Cod National Seashore, which will ensure public access in that area forever. It's been used to conserve floodplains in the Conte Refuge, which you'll hear more about later. It's been used for local park creation and renovation across the state, like Hadwin Park here in Worcester, where the city is leveraging LWCF funds to replace basketball courts, the playground, and walkways. And it's been used to build and extend trails, like in Northampton, where the city leveraged LWCF funds with community preservation funds to extend the Mass Central Rail Trail on the Mill River Greenway. But despite these successes and the widespread support of LWCF, the program's future wasn't always guaranteed. In fact, the program was set to expire in 2015, and I could do an entire webinar on the campaign to reauthorize the program, but suffice it to say that after nearly a decade of work by champions in Congress and advocates across the country, the program was permanently reauthorized as part of a big public lands bill that passed in early 2019 with tremendous bipartisan support. And that was a huge victory, historic, but there was one important piece missing. So remember in the beginning, I mentioned that $900 million is put into the Land and Water Conservation Fund each year. Well, over the 55 years of the program, billions of dollars have been diverted from the fund to other non-conservation purposes. And as a result, there's a substantial backlog of federal and state conservation needs. And so that brings us to today and the massive effort to permanently and fully fund the Land and Water Conservation Fund. Next slide, please. Thanks. At this point, that would effectively double the amount of money that's been allocated to these projects in the last 20 years or so. So really, it's a significant amount of money. This effort has brought together a wide range of organizations, including large national ones like the Nature Conservancy, as well as recreation user groups and sportsmen, outdoor businesses, historic preservationists, community stakeholders, ranchers, timber companies, educators, environmental justice groups, land trusts. Really just an incredible, incredible community has come together around this. And recently we teamed up with a coalition that was working to deal with the backlog of maintenance projects on public lands. And the result is the Great American Outdoors Act, a bill that fully funds the Land and Water Conservation Fund, as well as provides funding to address the maintenance backlog on public lands. As you may have heard, the bill recently passed the Senate with incredible bipartisan support, and President Trump has said that he'll sign it when it gets to his desk. The House is expected to consider this bill around the end of the month, and the House companion bill already has over 210 co-sponsors. I think it was 211 as of this morning, which is really exciting. So I'm going to take my last few minutes here to talk a little bit about the kind of work that goes into supporting a campaign like this. So as you can imagine, such a long campaign really has to keep up the momentum. There are so many different issues that are on the radar vying for public attention. And so one of the challenges is keeping this front and center. And so there are a few ways that we do that. There's been a strong media component of this campaign with coverage in national, policy, and regional media. And this has been especially important for building awareness and support across the country. We've helped to mobilize letters from various groups, like the one you can see here that was signed by the 6 previous secretaries of the Department of Interior in support of full funding. We've also coordinated similar letters from the U.S. Chamber of Commerce, outdoor businesses, and over 800 conservation and recreation groups across the country. And social media has been an important tool for sharing press, resources, information, calling on members of Congress to take action, and then thanking them when they do. But all of this would be for naught if we didn't have legislative champions to lead the charge. So we work to build those champions in the legislature through a variety of strategies. And Rep. McGovern mentioned this. So one of the things we do is we bring members out into the field to see LWCF projects in their district. And these field visits are so important for connecting members to this issue. And we've seen direct action coming out of them. So here on the left, you can see Representative McGovern out with us at the Conte Refuge. And after a few visits with us, he led a letter calling for full funding for LWCF and also spoke on the floor about the importance of the Conte Refuge during the appropriations process. We also participate in events like this one with Rep. Kennedy, where members can speak publicly about the program and continue to keep it at the front of mind. And then in addition to regular outreach and strong relationships with our government relations team, we also work with our trustees to reach out. Every year we do an advocacy day where we go down to DC and we talk to members. And this year we did that virtually. And remember, TNC is just one organization of many working across the country in every state. So you can imagine how years of keeping LWCF front of mind and working with legislative champions could get us where we are today. And so at this point, I'm going to turn things over to Markelle to share how LWCF touches down in her conservation work.
Great. Thank you so much, Emily. Hopefully everybody can see and hear me. Yeah, so when I first moved to New England, I was amazed at how many states you could cross in a day's drive. I couldn't believe it. I was from Michigan and I was astounded at it. And I still am. I think it's just such a diverse place where we get to live and recreate, and just amazing how many cities are so close to rural farmland and how many urban areas are right next to large rivers like the Connecticut River. So what you're seeing in front of you here is a map of the Conte Refuge. The Conte National Fish and Wildlife Refuge is actually one of 3 national wildlife refuges with the name fish in it. And because of this Connecticut River watershed. It's 7.2 million acres in size, and it runs through 4 states, Massachusetts, Connecticut, New Hampshire, and Vermont. It is made up of about 40,000 acres, and that's these little dots on the maps that are here are different divisions and units. So there are about 10 divisions and 12 units within the refuge boundary. So this is thank you. This is a place that we definitely care about. And this next piece is a way that we engage with LWCF through a regional conservation partnership. So this is called the Friends of Conte. The Friends of Conte was formed in 2005, and it is a coalition made up of about 70 organizations, public and private, and individuals throughout the Connecticut River watershed. And it was formed in 2005 and was originally chaired by Kim Lutz, TNC's director of the Connecticut River program. So since 2005, so for about 15 years, the Friends of Conte has played a pivotal role in bringing federal funding to on-the-ground projects in the Connecticut River watershed, and really worked with the Conte Refuge to partner and to make the case for the importance of land acquisition and the importance of conservation getting done on the ground. I took over chairing the Friends of Conte in 2018. The group is going strong, and we are attempting now to diversify our membership. We're expanding our reach, trying to get more participation from all 4 states, and we're trying to expand to do not just land protection, but also think about how we can accelerate the pace of dam removal, of universal access trail creation, of environmental education, and other outreach efforts in the watershed. The executive team of the Friends of Conte is comprised of many different organizations, so not just the Nature Conservancy, but also Kestrel Land Trust, Connecticut Audubon Society, Wyndham Regional Commission, Appalachian Mountain Club, and the Springfield Museums. So one of the things the Friends of Conte does to advocate and signal to people that there are important opportunities within the Conte Refuge is we prepare this lookbook. It's also called a pretty book, and I work with Emily and others to highlight some of these project opportunities. So for FY 21-22, we prepared this lookbook, and this is just what it looks like, a little sample here, but there are 42 projects within the refuge, which total more than $17 million. And this is basically something that we leave with legislators that really makes the case that we have the projects, we have the opportunity here, and we really are just looking for LWCF funding to realize those opportunities. Since 2005, the Friends of Conte has secured more than $29 million in federal funding, and that's resulted in 6,600 acres being added to the refuge, but also really significantly has leveraged 400,000 more acres of protected acreage of land in the Conte Refuge. So now the issue here, of course, is one that Emily highlighted. So LWCF is not fully funded, which means that although we've requested 17 million, on average we get anywhere between 0 to 6 million, usually around 3 million. So yeah, so moving forward, we hope that with full funding of LWCF, we won't be constrained anymore because there will be enough funding to do all $17 million worth of projects. Next slide, please. So there's no substitute for personal FaceTime, which we don't get much of these days, but also just personal interaction with our legislators. And we have had this opportunity that Emily mentioned to meet with Representative McGovern, who just happens to have an office in Northampton nearby my office, and we get to take him on hikes near the Conte Refuge. So we've been on the Fort River Division, hiking that universal access trail with him. He's led the sign-on letter in support of full funding of LWCF, and we have so appreciated the role that he's played, and just we've appreciated the opportunity to be able to talk with him about the importance of conservation work in the watershed. This is truly a partnership. I would say, you know, the Conte Refuge is one defined by partnerships, and he gets that and he's championed it. So we are very thankful for him and his efforts. Next slide, please. So now I wanted to just zoom in a little even closer here to highlight a land acquisition, a land protection project that we completed in Chesterfield, Massachusetts. So as residents of New England, there's nothing kind of more iconic as mill building on a river. We happen to live in a part of the country where mills are common and we're often powered by the river. And so many mill sites are along our rivers. So this is one instance where there was a sawmill here in Chesterfield in the same location for 150 years. Sadly, the owner of this sawmill was facing some financial troubles, like many sawmill owners. Fuel prices and other infrastructure that he had to deal with were forcing him to go out of business. And people were definitely, he was having to do layoffs and was wondering what his options were. So we actually approached him about potentially protecting his land. And we thought about why we would do that. This is actually the land bordering Dead Branch Brook, which historically powered the sawmill at this location. Dead Branch Brook is also home to endangered freshwater mussels and dragonflies and is a tributary to the Westfield River. So it was an area we thought definitely was worthy of protection, but we wondered who might protect the land. Next slide, please. So here's the Dead Branch, which flows sort of north-south down the middle of this map. The northern piece here is Fisk Meadows Wildlife Management Area. That's the state of Massachusetts Department of Fish and Game. And the southern piece there is Dead Branch State Forest, which is a different arm of the state, the Department of Conservation and Recreation. TNC owns land in the middle. And we introduced another partner. And the reason we did that is because in thinking through who would be a good fit to own this land, we knew that having to deal with a sawmill, a gravel pit, and log piles, and it would take a lot of effort. And we wanted to restore this site. So we felt that the Conte National Fish and Wildlife Refuge was the best partner. So we introduced them to the landowner, and then we're very thrilled that in November of 2011, we partnered with U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service to close the project. So they acquired 96 acres in total and paid close to $1 million to the sawmill owner to do that. The exciting thing is that this was funded by LWCF, that it was supported by another conservation hero, Representative John Olver of Massachusetts, through the FY11 Interior Appropriations Bill. And now the former sawmill is protected land. The site is being restored by the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service. It is the Dead Branch division of the Conte Refuge, and now there are native plants going in where the gravel pit once was, and the buildings once stood. And there's a north-south corridor of protected land bordering the Dead Branch from its headwaters all the way to its confluence with the east branch of the Westfield River, and then ultimately emptying into the Connecticut River. So then we come full circle. Emily, I'll hand it off to you again. Thank you.
Okay. For some reason, it won't let me turn my video back on, but that's fine. So we just wanted to close this webinar with a few minutes about what you can do to help. And I really love sharing this graphic because, as you can see, the most important voice a congressperson can hear from is yours. And so whether you are speaking up through phone calls, personal emails, visits, attending district days once we're allowed to be in person again, signing on to sign-on letters, depending on how much time you have, there are lots of different ways that you can engage and make your voice heard. And now is really the perfect time to reach out. Next slide, please. So as we said, now is really the time for action. So please contact your representatives and tell them why it is that you care about access to the outdoors. Really make it personal. Maybe your family frequents a park conserved through LWCF. Maybe you just learned about it and you want to look into it more. But really, hearing from you is so, so important. Ask your representatives to sign on to the Great American Outdoors Act and ask that they support quick passage with no amendments. And if your member has signed on already, thank them for taking action. And then go and share this effort with your friends and family all across the country. like I said, this program is used in almost every county in the US. So everyone stands to gain from this. So please reach out to your friends and family and encourage them to take action as well. So thank you all so much for taking the time to learn more about the Land and Water Conservation Fund today. We are so close to achieving full and permanent funding for the program, and I really hope that you can help us get there. So thank you. And Markelle and I are happy to answer any questions.
Yes, thank you both for the wonderful presentation and behind the scenes look at this important legislation. As Emily mentioned, we'll be jumping into some questions for her and Markelle. As a reminder, you can submit questions using the Q&A button at the bottom of your screen. We've got a lot coming in already, so we'll try to get to as many as we can in the time we have. So Emily, you just mentioned that the best way for anyone interested to get involved would be to write to their representatives and express their support for LWCF. What's the easiest way for folks to do that?
Thanks, Lauren. That's a great question. So I would say it really depends on how much time you have to give. So if you only have a minute, you can send a note through the Nature Conservancy's Action Center, which I think Lauren will share the link to in the chat. But if you have 5 minutes, I would highly recommend that you write a personal email or make a phone call to your representative. They get form letters all the time, so personal communication really stands out. And so I think Lauren will also be putting a link in the chat of where you can find out who your representative is if you don't know. There's a really easy tool online where you can just go and type in your address and it will link you to your rep and their contact information. And so all of that is right there for you to send them an email or give them a phone call. And really don't be afraid to reach out. Offices want to hear from constituents, and it's important that they know that the action that they're taking is supported by their communities.
Awesome, thank you. Markelle, on your end, do you have any tips on how our audience can get involved locally, perhaps with groups like Friends of Conte?
Yes, so you can definitely get involved with the Friends of Conte. There are also local friends groups. So the Conte Refuge, as you can see by that map, has different units and divisions all over the 4 states. So you could find one of those that's closest to where you live and reach out. There's likely a friends group there. I know there's a Friends of Mohegan, a Friends of Pondicherry, and really the Friends of Conte is the umbrella group for all those friends groups. So so feel free to reach out to me too, and we could connect you with a friends group if you'd be interested. Volunteers are always welcome.
Awesome, and we've got one specific question about people and citizen scientists getting involved to help on LWCF funded projects in Massachusetts, particularly in Eastern Mass.
Yeah, so how an individual might help. Yeah, that's a great question. I mean, again, I would say direct it to, I'm presuming the land is already protected that they're talking about. But if it was funded with LWCF and is now part of the Conte, I guess if this is in Eastern Mass, it's probably not part of the Conte Refuge. But, you know, all these sort of protected lands that use LWCF as funding, you know, usually the owner is a land trust or a state agency, and there's always an opportunity to contact the owner or the steward. I know that for the Nature Conservancy, we have preserve stewards who actually help us, and they're citizens who live nearby who do visits for us and volunteer. So there are usually ways to get involved. We're desperate for help, so yeah.
Awesome, thank you. And so Emily, what do you love most about your work supporting policies like LWCF and engaging with local and federal governments to advocate for conservation?
Well, at a base level, I deeply believe that conservation of nature for all people is a need to have, not a nice to have. So first, like, I love being able to work on a cause that I'm deeply passionate about. And what's fun about conservation is that in many cases, it tends to be nonpartisan or bipartisan. It's a place where when there's so much tension and disagreement, it's a place where we can oftentimes come together and affect real change and move forward. LWCF, nature-based solutions for resilient infrastructure, protecting working farms and forests, these are areas that people across the political spectrum care about. And it's not just the political side. You know, increasingly conservation and the environment are being seen and acted on in a much more holistic way. And we're working with the business community and public health and social justice and recreation communities. And I'm really seeing all of these causes coalesce together to build a better future. And it's just great to be a part of that.
Great. And Markelle, what about you? What's been so special for you in leading the Friends of Conte and helping support LWCF funded projects here in Massachusetts?
I really love the process with Friends of Conte because it's sort of a part of my position that was formerly missing. I wasn't as involved on the policy end of things, but getting to now see the impact that a coalition like the Friends of Conte can have on policy, and then also getting to see the results of that funding on the ground and see these acres protected by our partners and members of the Friends of Conte is super satisfying and gratifying, and why I love what I do, and I feel so fortunate to be able to do it. But I think making those connections and protecting those important places that matter to people that a lot of us are using right now is really critical and is done well by partnerships.
Awesome. And for both of you, how is LWCF funding distributed? What does fully funding the program mean for projects here in Massachusetts?
Sure. So I can take on the first part, and then Markelle, maybe you can talk about some of the implications for Conte, for example. So like I said, LWCF sort of falls into two buckets. There's the federal side and the state side, and they function a little bit differently. So on the federal side, the administration submits a project list from each agency. So for example, the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service will put together a list of projects across the country that are priorities for them. Those lists get submitted to Congress, and then ultimately Congress, the congressional appropriations process, decides which agencies get how much money. On the state side, each state gets an allocation based on a formula that takes into account the population of the state. And then it's up to each individual state to decide how to distribute those funds. So here in Massachusetts, the Executive Office of Energy and Environmental Affairs is responsible for that. And they do it through a competitive grant process. The funding can either go to state agencies, municipalities, or tribes. And for municipalities to apply, they have to have an open space and recreation plan. So going back to an earlier question about how to engage on the local level, that's something you can do, is to work with your local select board or town council to make sure that you have a robust open space and recreation plan, and then to support conservation projects when they come up to be voted on. So fully funding this program would effectively double the amount of money that's been available in recent years. FY20 funding was at $495 million out of that $900 million that could have been, and that was the highest in 17 years. So fully funding would really add a significant chunk of money to our ability to use here. So Markelle, I'll pass it over to you.
Yeah, so on the federal side for LWCF and for Conte funding, as I mentioned, Conte's received anywhere from $0 to $6 million a year, and last year, unfortunately, was zero. And that is really unfortunate. There's a ranking that the Department of Interior does for all the national wildlife refuges. And unfortunately, Conte often straddles that line of funding. So sometimes we're just not really sure where we're gonna fall. And what is nice and so essential about full funding of LWCF is that it no longer will matter where we fall on that list, because full funding will guarantee that Conte gets money. And that means, on the other end of things, when I think about all those projects, that's landowners. Those are people who, willing sellers who often need this, influx of income from their land. And so those are real relationships and commitments that are made. So it would be excellent to see this funded for them as well.
Yeah, so to follow up on kind of something that you said, Emily, what about land that hasn't yet been conserved? So how can TNC, or maybe for Markelle too, how can TNC members maximize their impact in getting a new project started that might benefit from this funding?
Well, I can jump in, Emily. I mean, I feel like like on the front end of conservation, if there's ever land that you hear about, we get land tips are so important. I mean, that's how we hear about future land protection, projects, is really from people on the ground, local people saying, "Hey, did you hear?" And then we can kind of proactively reach out. And the other great thing about Massachusetts and New England in general is we are a close-knit group of conservation partners. So if you reach out to us, we're going to connect you with whomever the best partner might be to protect the land. And we have quite a network, so that's great too. And it's a very friendly, collegial group. So there's not turfiness, and we're happy to work with you. And we rely on those tips. So.
Awesome, thank you. And so the amount that was cited that from LWCF that comes to Massachusetts, is that for land acquisition, management of already protected land, or for something else? So what kinds of projects are considered in that grant process?
So I guess I'm not 100% sure which. I feel like I threw a lot of numbers out. If we're talking about the numbers that came through that's already been funded. So that's a range of things, from land acquisition to conservation restrictions, and also building trails, playgrounds, doing restoration, or I guess maybe don't call it restoration on a playground, but renovation, there you go. Renovation of local parks and infrastructure around that. But I think the other number that was cited, I think Markelle talked about how many projects are in the Conte that still would need to be funded, and those are all acquisition or easements. So all of those would be just land protection, if that makes sense. I hope that answered the question.
Yeah, sorry. To be more specific, the question was referring to the $17 million that was cited.
Yeah, those are, so the 17 million, those, Emily, yeah, that's right. Those are all land protection, land. So I guess I'm using land acquisition and land protection sort of synonymously here, but really purchasing of land interests. So that could be conservation restrictions, same thing as conservation easements, or fee title acquisition or purchase of land. But we are thinking about expanding our lookbook to include other kinds of projects too. So there's interest by lots of folks, members of the Friends of Conte, in really diversifying our requests so that we can address some of these other needs in the watershed too, not just land acquisition.
Great, thank you. And so we've got a comment and a question. Congratulations on the Dead Branch River. What projects are currently underway that folks can speak to their representatives about?
That's a great question. Yeah, I mean, I would say, so yeah, we get that question a lot, as Emily and I, when we do the lookbook. People want to know, like, well, what is that project? Or where is it, and how many acres, and what's the cost? And we also have to respect privacy because there's landowner confidentiality, so we can't really share a lot of information, but we do want to make the case. So we're always sort of treading that line a little bit. But for sure, there are other Dead Branch projects that we would love to see completed and are working with the Conte Refuge right now. And if somebody wanted to advocate for those, I think, advocating on the project level, I'll let Emily answer that because I don't know how helpful that is to advocate project by project. Certainly the Friends of Conte advocates for the Dead Branch as a whole. But do you have any comment on that, Emily, advocating for the individual project?
I mean, I think anytime you're talking to a legislator, if you can tell a local story from their district, from your neighborhood, it always is most effective, because that's, again, making it personal to you and to them. And so whether you can speak to a project that's already been done around you or speaking to an opportunity, legislators also understand this confidentiality piece that Markelle mentioned. So, when we go in and we talk about, there are these many potential projects in your district, they know that there's only so much level of detail that we can get into about that. But certainly we can talk about the resources that those projects would conserve, the number of people who live within a certain distance of that resource, how completing those projects would positively benefit the communities in that district is really the way I would think about focusing on it.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Great, thank you. So we've got a couple of questions that I'm going to consolidate here about the current oil and gas revenues, and so how much funding there is there and how much gets allocated to LWCF, and if we were to slow down on oil and gas leases in the future, would that affect LWCF funding?
Sure, those are great questions. The amount of money that comes in from offshore oil and gas leases is enormous. So the Department of Interior's Natural Resource Revenue reports that we had annual energy revenues of about $7 billion. So specifically regarding the Outer Continental Shelf dollars that fund LWCF, the amount that we take in from the current production areas without opening any new areas fully would cover LWCF's $900 million, as well as all other obligations. There are other pots of money that come in through those revenues that go to different kinds of projects. You could fund all of that, all of LWCF, everything in the Great American Outdoors Act, and still have $4 billion that goes into the general treasury. So there's a lot of money here. I think the question about, what happens if we decrease offshore oil and gas is a great one. I mean, that's what we're all working toward, is a more sustainable, renewable energy future, right? So, but the reality is that this is still happening now. And even if leasing revenues were cut in half, there would still be enough to cover LWCF. And so LWCF was really, as well as all of the other things that are obligated under that fund. So LWCF was created as sort of an offset for that work, that extraction, to be able to put funding that into doing something good for our communities. And so as long as that's happening, we should be honoring that promise of investing funds in those communities. Now, if in the future we reduce offshore oil and gas so much that we don't have any money left for LWCF, that is a huge, great new problem to have. And, we can think about other ways to do this. The reality is that any energy development has impacts on our land and water. So, I mean, I'm just making this up, but maybe in the future we'd want to talk about other kinds of energy development and whether there's an opportunity to create a similar kind of fund. So right now the money is there in offshore oil and gas. The promise has been made and we want that to be honored. And in the future, if things change, organizations like ours and everyone else who loves LWCF will be ready to have those conversations and think creatively.
Great. And so why is the funding proposal considered permanent if it depends on congressional authorization on a recurring basis? Getting a little in the weeds here.
Yeah, so this has gotten complicated, I'm sorry. So there are sort of two pieces. There was the reauthorizing of the program and then permanently funding it. So the program now permanently exists, which is great. That was a success in 2019. But we still have to go through this yearly appropriations process. So what would happen is that if we can permanently and fully fund Land and Water Conservation Fund, we don't have to go through that appropriations process every year. We don't have to fight to increase the amount of money that Congress is appropriating to the Land and Water Conservation Fund it will be appropriated at that $900 million mark. And that's where it comes then to, like Markelle was saying, working with the agencies to elevate projects within the agency. So then it becomes more of a competition based on the need for projects competitively around the country within these agencies, and not a fight based on how high are you on this list and can we increase the money a little bit more to get this other project in, which is sort of how it's been working now. So it will take that piece out of it. Hopefully that's clear. I'm sorry. I know talking about this at a high level sometimes can be challenging because it is really quite detailed and wonky when you get into it.
Great. I think you did a great job. Markelle, what is one of your favorite land protection anecdotes?
Oh my goodness. I have good stories. Part of the work that I do, is getting, one of the best parts is talking with landowners about their land and why they love it and why they want to conserve it. I mean, I have crazy stories about driving through snowstorms up to sit at people's kitchen tables and meeting with a variety of characters, loggers and landowners from New York City, and all in a farmhouse in Western Massachusetts. So I have good stories. but yeah, I mean, just generally, I think I so appreciate the opportunity to learn. I always learn from the people that I get the chance to work with, and the landowners are so committed, and they're not making any more land. So so I really think that it's an asset, and now more than ever during this pandemic, I am so thankful for these places that have been set aside and not paved, so that we can get outside. And there are all kinds of places. There are parks, and there's, wild forests with trails through it, and, but they run the gamut, but they're so critical for our emotional well-being. So yeah, I feel like it's a privilege to get to work with landowners, and to get to spend these federal dollars and, on these important projects. So.
Awesome. Thank you. So can LWCF funding be used on Native American lands? I think one of you might have mentioned that briefly.
Yes.
Awesome. Short answer. Great. Well, so we've got about 5 minutes left here. So we're approaching the end of our time today. I want to give you some time, Emily or Markelle, if you have any final thoughts that you would like to share with everyone who joined.
You want to go first?
I can, sure, I'll jump in. I think that one theme that seems to resonate a lot lately is just the importance of taking action for everybody right now. It seems really critical, and this is an opportunity to take action on something that that seems like it's actually, this is pretty good news that we've gotten this far with LWCF. And this is an opportunity, I think, to make the phone call and to tell the personal story and write that letter, and take some action and feel good about it, because there's a lot to feel not good about right now. But there's a lot that's still good that's happening. So so I guess the call to action, and the other, from my perspective, I think too, the land tip, if you know of land that you feel like is important to protect, or if there's a place you see that there's no access for people to get out and enjoy nature, where are those places? And I think equitable distribution of protected land is something that we really need to start caring and paying attention to more. So so I'm interested in those areas close to the urban centers that are really, actually Conte Refuge is a good example of that, because 70 million people are within a day's drive of refuge land. But there are other places that may be lacking protected open space. So what are those places? And call a local land trust, make the call the Nature Conservancy, and write a letter to your legislator.
Thanks, Markelle. I mean, I don't think I could have said that better myself. Just as a reminder, the bill number is HR 7092. And, you know, since Markelle so beautifully said, you know, the call to action, I think too, I would just say this work is a team sport. A lot of organizations work together and a lot of funding sources work together to get these things done. Even your local park or playground is going to be funded potentially through LWCF, Community Preservation Fund, state money, private money. So fully funding LWCF doesn't only just provide money for those projects, it's leveraged against a tremendous amount of money from other sources. So the impacts are so much bigger than just $900 million worth of projects. I wish I had a stat on that, actually. I'm sure somebody does. I don't know it off the top of my head, but you know, this isn't just about one piece. They all work together to conserve the mosaic of places that are important, that make Massachusetts a place we want to live, work, explore, play. And so, you know, this is just one piece of the puzzle, and I hope that it's inspired you to take action on this and maybe learn a little bit more about some of the other pieces that are important to your communities.
Great. Well, thank you both. And Emily, could you repeat that bill number one more time, just in case anyone's trying to write it down?
Yeah, sure. So it's in the House, it's HR 7092. But also if you tell them the Great American Outdoors Act, hopefully all of them have heard from somebody by now about it. So they should be familiar.
Excellent. Well, thank you all for joining us today. We're reaching the end of our time, and we're very sorry if we didn't get to all of your questions, but we thank you all for your support of the Nature Conservancy. It's what makes all of this work possible that Emily and Markelle and staff across our state are doing. We will be sending everyone a follow-up email in the coming days with links to the resources we talked about today and to follow up on any information that we missed sharing with you. It will also contain a link to the recording of this webinar if you want to share or watch it again. You can also find the full webinar schedule and other past recordings at nature.org/MA-webinars. If you're enjoying these events, please share them with your friends. We love to see so many of you in attendance week after week. You can follow us on social media to keep up with our work and get updates on upcoming virtual opportunities to connect with our staff. And don't forget to join us for next week's webinar to learn more about TNC's work along the Connecticut River, actually in the same area that Markelle is talking about today. It will be about the Fanny Stebbins Memorial Wildlife Refuge, and we'll be joined by some of Markelle's other team members who helped make this remarkable restoration happen, as well as some community partners with whom we've collaborated. Thank you again for joining us, and have a wonderful afternoon.